Welcome to Art Journaling 3 Bold Backgrounds. My name's Kate Crane. You may have seen me in Craft Stamper or Scrap 365 in the UK, or you may have seen me in some of the American art journaling publications. You might have seen my previous art journaling DVDs, and if that's the case, welcome back. I don't have any official qualifications in art, but I love to do it, and that's what drives me on to do more, learn more, play more and create more. I've taken part in several workshops along the way because I think we all have such a lot to learn from each other. It's great to try something different, learn new techniques off other people and eventually give them your own twist and develop your own style. I'm proud to say that most of the time I make it up as I go along. I'm not afraid to try new things, and if it goes wrong, well, that's part of it. I journal because I love it. Sometimes I have a lot to say, sometimes I just want to capture a moment, or sometimes it's because I want to try out a new product or a new technique, or just have a good old mess around with paints and inks. A journal is a great place to play and experiment, and the best thing about it is that you don't have to share it with anyone else if you don't want to. So that alone gives you the freedom to create whatever you want to with no rules or boundaries. You can journal with any mediums and any techniques. You don't have to rush out and buy a load of new equipment. You probably have plenty enough to get on with, and one of the exciting challenges in art journaling is to use what you already have and come up with different ways to use it. You may have seen my previous DVDs and even had a chance to play along. These DVDs are going to work in a similar way. In bold backgrounds, I will prepare some backgrounds using a variety of paints and inks and give you some ideas for different layouts on your pages. And in personalised pages, you will see me finishing those same backgrounds off and taking it right through to the journaling at the end. You may have seen my first DVD, and I talked a lot then about products and how they worked and how I was going to use them. But today I'm going to be using some slightly different products, so let me just talk you through what I'm going to be using. First of all, acrylic paints. Now I'm going to use some different sorts of acrylic paints. These ones here are Claudine Helmuth Studio line, Ranger Dabbers and Golden Fluid Acrylics. All slightly different, all do a different job, but equally you can use them all together. The next thing here is gesso. I've got two brands with me today, so this is Golden Gesso and Claudine Helmuth Studio line gesso. Really good as a base under acrylic paints, but also useful for other things, which you'll see. And multi-medium, sometimes called matte medium, soft gel, matte medium. Again, these both do a similar job. They act really well as a glue for gluing images and collage images, scrapbook papers and so on down. Also act as a seal over the top of paint. I'm also going to be using these really colourful ink sprays by Delusions, now produced by Ranger. These ink sprays come in gorgeous bright colours. What's also really useful when you're working with ink sprays is to have a water mister. These inks react with water and you can create all sorts of effects by having a water mister bottle as well. I'm also going to be using some archival ink pads in a range of colours. These are permanent and waterproof. They come in a great range of colours and they give you a really nice crisp clean stamp image. Liquid pearls are a recent discovery for me, but they're a great way to add a dimensional accent to your pages. So you can see they come in a full range of colours. You can use these on paper, you can even use them on fabric, you can paint with them, but what I like to do is scribble on pages with them. So here's a selection of some of the pens and pencils that I'll be using. There's a Faber-Castell Pitt pen in super fine, really nice for journaling. We'll write on most backgrounds as long as the background is really, really dry. Now, Sharpie poster paint pens are really nice for adding touches of colour to a page. They'll pretty much write on anything. Very similar pens would be Posca pens. This is a charcoal pencil, and I will be using this throughout the DVDs to give things a bit of an edge, bit of shading. And I'll be using this very old-fashioned dip pen and some calligraphy ink, and I do find that this is the one pen that will write on any kind of background. It's fairly unpredictable, it splatters a bit, but I like that. It's not perfect, and we like things that aren't perfect. Pastels and oil pastels are a great way of adding even more colour to a page, and I'm going to be using a couple of different kinds. Let me show you those. These ones are water-soluble oil pastels by Portfolio. These used to be really tricky to get hold of in the UK, but now you can get hold of those quite easily. They are very, very soft and they blend really easily, so they're really popular with art journalers and mixed media artists. And these are pan pastels, and these are now readily available in the UK. These come in gorgeous colours, they blend really, really easily and they stay put on the page, unlike some pastels which can be a bit chalky. These are a really nice way to add a pop of colour to the page. I'm going to be using lots of different stencils. I love stencils, there's so much that you can do with them. They've got so many uses. You can see by looking, mine are really well used. I'm going to be using some by the Crafters Workshop, Balsa Designs and Delusions. And these ones come in 2 sizes, so I've got these in small and large. And finally, just some useful bits and pieces and also some essential items. First of all, a collection of junk bottle lids, credit cards, really useful for adding texture with paint. This is washi tape, masking tape, and it's a really nice way of adding pictures and images to a page, a bit different. I'm going to be using my ancient Dymo label maker. And bits of vintage text. It's a really nice colour for writing on, it's nice for stamping on, it's just really useful. And some essential items. Baby wipes are essential for cleaning up, keeping your area clean, keeping your hands clean. Kitchen roll, especially when using ink sprays, we use this for blotting, taking off any excess. And finally, just to keep your work area nice and clean, a craft mat. You can also use these for mixing paints on and so on, and it does protect your work area. Let me start by showing you first of all which journal I'm going to be working in for this page. I'm going to work in my Vintage Ledger journal. One of the reasons is I'm going to be using mainly inks, and this has a slight coated paper inside and takes the inks really well. They stay really nice and bright on the page. I'm going to be using these Delusions inks, and I've chosen for this page Pure Sunshine, Postbox Red and Bubblegum Pink. Those colours will blend really nicely together because on the colour wheel they are neighbouring colours, so those colours will blend really nicely. I'm going to be using quite a few stencils. I've chosen 2 Delusion stencils, and I'm going to be using water and ink through these stencils, so also going to be using a water mister. I'm going to do a technique called ghosting, which was a technique designed by Diane Reevely, who's designed the inks, a Crafters Workshop stencil and a Balsa Designs stencil for the Crafters Workshop. I'm also going to be using some archival inks in a nice red, vermilion and jet black. This background stamp, which is a Delusions background stamp. I'm not going to mount this one on an acrylic block because I want to keep it nice and flexible. And a Delusions border stamp of vines, solid vines. I might want to add a touch of paint, so again from the same colour family. This is a Claudine Helmers Studio paint, a dash of red. Bit of gesso, so I'm going to scrape this through a stencil. And finally, some liquid pearls in various colours. I'll decide which colours as I'm going along, but these add a really nice dimensional element to the page. Now this is quite messy, working with these inks. This will be the last time you see my hands clean, I think, in this DVD. I'm going to protect the rest of my journal with just cheap copy paper because the inks will run and I don't want it to affect pages that I've previously done. So I'm just popping that inside there, gives the ink something to run off onto. I'm going to be working on a double page, but what I'm going to do, I'm going to spray all of the inks on this side and then I'm going to bring this page over and sandwich it down. So I'm going to need enough ink on here. It's got to really pool on here so that there's enough ink on this side to transfer onto this side here. Now it's very useful to have some kitchen roll ready. As I say, this is messy. The inks are going to run. They also have a tendency to pool a bit down the middle here. So you might just want your kitchen roll ready to blot into the middle. Otherwise you might find it seeps right through the spine of your book. I'm just going on randomly here because these inks are going to blend with each other anyway. You can see how that's really got to pool. Now, some people like to use water with their inks. I tend not to because I like the inks to stay really strong and vibrant on the page. And of course that does water it down a little bit. It depends on the book that you're using and the type of paper that you've got. So best thing is just try it and see. I'm going to bring this over. Now if there's not quite enough ink, it doesn't matter because you can always add more. Now you can see straight away that ink's pooling down the middle, so I just want to remove some of that there. Now if you blot that straight away, you're going to be taking a lot of the colour off. So if you let it sit for a little while, then the ink tends to be a little bit stronger. And just to remove some of that excess, I'm just going to roll over with that. And that's just enough to blot off the excess. It doesn't matter if it starts to make little patterns with the kitchen towel. That's kind of nice. Again, just watch that spine, make sure it's not seeping right through. Okay, so there's our first layer. Now I'm going to use a stencil and some water now. Now there is a trick to this technique. You don't want to pull water through too much, it's more of a fine mist. And then count to about 10, and that's what Diane recommends. She's the one who designed this technique. If you blot too early, the water hasn't had a chance to react to the ink. If you blot too late, the water started to dry and nothing will happen. You can actually see it's starting to work. Now you can probably see there's a sort of bit of a pattern there. Now because my stencil is wet, I can now flip that. That will create a different texture there. Probably get another one there. Now just blot these ones and you'll see it starts to create a bit of a... Well, that's looking good. And a bit more. This is all fairly random, it's just lots of background texture. I can add more too. You'll soon know if you've added too much water because it just pools underneath the stencil and you won't get any pattern, you will just get a puddle. Now I like to just dry this off a little bit before I spray any ink on. If I spray ink straight onto this now through a stencil, it might just bleed a little bit, so I'm just going to give that just a few seconds, just enough to dry off the excess water on that page. I'm going to come in with another stencil. This is another Delusion stencil now. And I want to spray through and get some of these letters. Now this is a 2-in-1 stencil, so it's also got a border around the edge. Now I don't want to go over that edge, so I'm going to mask that. If I was sort of doing neat card making, I would mask this properly. But all I actually need to do is cover up those edges. So I'm just going to do that. And the ink needs to be not too close. Too close, it's just going to pool underneath and make a big puddle. So it wants to be a reasonable distance away, and it wants to be just a light spray. And I can move that. And do the same again. I'm going to move it onto the other side as well here. And just mask those edges again. Now what I've also got now is quite a collection of ink on here, so I can now flip that over and just build in an extra bit of pattern with that in. I'm just looking around now for where needs a little bit more. And you'll find it doesn't always give you the exact letter shapes, and if it does they will be backwards. And I don't think that matters, it's just building up the pattern in the background. I'm going to use my Vermilion archival ink now and my background stencil. Now it's always best to bring the ink to the stamp so you don't get it too inky. What I'm going to do is actually just roll the stamp. And by doing this rolling technique, it means you don't get a set rectangle, you get more of a random. So I'm going to just add this in random places over the background. One of the reasons why I like to work in the same colour family is I can keep adding to the background. The same colour, I can add as much as I want to, and I find it can get really busy but without being too cluttered. So it's a really nice way to build up a lot of depth in the background, stick to the same colour family. I'm going to bring this onto the other side just in a few random places. And I've just switched to a number stamp now. I'm going to put this again in random places. This is another Delusions background stamp. And that's it for now. I may add more as I go along, but for the moment I'm going to leave that as it is. Now I'm going to introduce another stamp now. You can see this is very well used. This is one of my favourites. This is another Delusion stamp, and it stamps in a nice solid colour. What I'm going to do is use the same Vermilion ink and also bring in some jet black. I'm going to stamp this as a border along the edge, first in the red and then again in the black, and slightly offset it. This brings real depth to the borders, I think you'll see as I do this. So again, ink to the stamp. And you can vary the heights of these, overlap them a little bit. Now you can bring this border really down to almost nothing and then back up again. It just varies it a little bit so it's not too uniform. I'm going to bring this along the top edge now, perhaps a little bit less than the bottom edge, so just in certain areas I might bring this along the top edge. and leaving some gaps. So I'm sort of varying it a bit, so there's a gap here and bringing it down along the edge here. I'm going to do the same again on the other side. So again, just bringing this in up and down along the top. And I might bring it really down here just to kind of frame that corner. And just a bit down the edge there. I'm going to go over this with black. When I come over with the black, I'm going to fill in some of these gaps here. So all the way along this lower edge, bringing it up and down. And using this archival ink means you get a really nice strong image when you stamp. I'm going to bring this one right up for that final corner. Now I'm just switching now to jet black, and I'm going to go over that border with the same stamp, and I'm just going to slightly offset it, and you'll see that this starts to really give it some depth. And I love the black against the bright background, it really makes those other colours pop. And again, I'm following the shape of what I've already stamped, but just filling in those gaps. I'm bringing it right up at the corners just to frame the corners. Doesn't matter that this paper's curling, by the way, this all goes flat again. I'm just going to carry on in the same way all around the edges where I've already stamped that vine. I'm going to add another layer now, a bit of paint this time. I'm going to use this Crafter's Workshop stencil. This is a Balzer Designs stencil. I'm just going to use a sponge. This is one I keep for paint. Don't use your best sponges. So I'm sponging some red through. Again, I'm keeping to the same colour family. It doesn't have to be a perfect image, it's just adding a little bit more colour and a little bit more texture on that side. Now that doesn't have to be a perfect image, that's just adding a little bit more texture, a little bit more colour to the background. Now I'm going to switch to this circle stencil and some gesso. I'm going to scrape this through, and by scraping through it means I can't be perfect with this, it's going to give me quite a random design, and it'll also give me some sort of half circles and partial circles, and I like that. So I'm just pushing that gesso through. You can see how it creates little edges and things. I like that effect. You can't be too neat with this. I'm using an old gift card for this. Some are more flexible than others. And this is quite a flexible one and it's nice to work with. I'm going to add one more on this side. Groups of 3 generally work quite well. I don't want this too symmetrical. But a group of 3 on each side works quite well. Now this is the final step to my background. I'm going to add these liquid pearls. These have been on the market for ages, but they're my recent discovery, and I really like the dimensional effect I can get with these on the page. So I can scribble swirls with them, you can even write with them, you can add little dots with them. So I'm going to use these on this page to scribble some large swirls, large circles. Now you need to apply a bit of pressure to these and then keep the pressure consistent, and then you can start to do things like that. Then you can bring in another colour. See how I'm still sticking with the same colour family and the colours that I started with. You can add some little dots if you wanted to. And again, once you get the pressure, you can just keep scribbling, maybe bring a bit of another colour in places. And moving on to the other side. And I quite like the way this overlaps the stamping that I've already got here. And another one a little bit higher up on the page. And bringing in a little bit of colour there, maybe some dots again. I can always add more to this later if I want to. As the page moves on, I might look at it later on and decide to add a little bit more. Now that's my background finished. I'm going to leave it there for now. You can see all the layers in this. We've had the ink, we've got the ghosting, we've sprayed some inks through a stencil, we've stamped another layer of background, we've stamped a border, added some gesso, added the liquid pearls, lots of layers there in the background, and I'll add a little bit more in the next DVD. This is a page that I've prepared in a very similar way, so it's similar but a little bit different. It's 2 pages that are eventually going to work as one. Now this first page here I prepared in the same way with the same colours, the red, the yellow and the pink, and I've done the ghosting technique here. I've stamped on, double stamped around the edge with the vine stamp. A couple of things that are a little bit different. I've used this stencil here, the Bolts the Design stencil for the Crafter's Workshop. That's the teardrops or the raindrop stencil. And I've done the same with the gesso, scraping through. And I've introduced here a little bit of this Delusion spray in London Blue, because the page that this is going to work with here has the London Blue and the vibrant turquoise, these mixed together to create this lovely sort of green colour. Prepared in exactly the same way, so the same scraping through the stencil, same border, it's double stamped, you can just see the blue stamped here, the liquid pearls, but I've introduced the blue here. Now these pages are going to work together because I'm going to cut a frame out of the centre of this one, so this one is going to show through. Now the reason why I've chosen these colours, if we go back to the colour wheel, this colour family here is this page. Now to really make the contrast and those colours really pop, on this side, if I look across the wheel, the opposite colours gives me the greens and the blues, and that gives me the really nice contrast between those pages. Now you can see here I've just penciled a little frame mark. Now normally at home I wouldn't do this, I'm a bit slapdash when I work at home, I would just stamp and cut that. But today, for the purpose of the camera, I have drawn with a ruler and marked that, because I'm going to stamp this little Stampatique fella in the middle there. This is a really nice way of using a small image on a big page, but it just needs something to frame here. So I'm going to use a border stamp. Back to the archival ink here, I want a really nice clean print. And I'm just going to mask it a little bit again. I'm a little bit slapdash how I mask this. I'm not making a neat card, it doesn't need to be perfect, but what I want to do is bring the border stamp from this corner of the frame to here. If the corners don't quite match up when I do this, it doesn't matter, because I can just go over it with a fine line pen and get it all to fit and all to match up afterwards. So I'm just going to stamp along that edge there. I'm going to do the same down this side here. Now I'm going to bring it along the bottom. Now I've just added some paper here to mask along this lower edge, and I'm just going to bring this stamp along here like this. Now these corners I will neaten up later on with a fine line pen. And I'm just going to bring this final edge of the border here. Now, all I need to do now is, with a craft knife, I'm going to remove this central part of the frame. Now, this is a really important step before you move that central part there, is to put a cutting mat in between those pages. If you don't do that, of course, you're going to cut through several pages in your journal. Now this border stamp isn't quite straight. It's deliberately not straight. It's got slightly wavy lines, so I need to follow the line as I'm cutting. So I can't cut along the edge of a ruler because that will be too straight. Now this central part, when you remove it, will be really useful to use on another journal page, so don't throw it away. And you should now be able to remove that central piece there, and now that reveals that underneath there. And then eventually I'm going to add him in the middle there. I'm going to touch up this and finish this off in the next DVD. This is a sketchbook. It started off life actually as a really cheap sketchbook, and I use this to mop up spills and things. You can see on this page here, this is one I've done a while ago, there's a really clear outline of a spill there. Or if I've got ink left over on stencils, I just put it in there. There's another example. This was a really big spill on that page, and all I do is mop it up off my craft mat. Here's another example. But these are quite nice. They make really nice random sort of backgrounds for a journal page. It's a little tip that I picked up once off Dina Wakely, to keep a cheap sketchbook, any ink on stencils, put it in, any spills, pick it up, and you've got the beginnings of a background. So what I've got here is some leftover ink off a Harlequin stencil, and at some point I've had a spillage of ink which I've mopped up there, and I'm going to now just build on this page. I don't quite know where I'm going with this. I'm just going to let this sort of grow organically as I go along, but I've got a few bits ready. I'm thinking that I might have this Stampatique character on here. I like this one because she looks particularly grumpy, and to that I might need to add more. This is a border stamp. Again, Stampatique, Joe Capasandon designed this one. It's called Abstract Foliage, and I might just bring that to make a border along the bottom here. And then I'm going to use some more random stamps. These are from Ma Vinci, and there's lovely sort of random things like barcodes, numbers, letters, that sort of thing. And I'm going to introduce those on the page. I'm going to use again the archival inks. And I'm going to stick to similar colours. I can build up a nice busy background with these sort of colours because these colours already exist. Maybe a bit of that as well. So I'm going to use those to just build up some more texture on the background. This stamp, I don't know if you can quite read that. That stamp says warning. That goes quite nicely with her, I think. And another stamp here, will be more clear when I stamp this, actually says handle with care. So I'll use those at some point probably. And then I may also introduce some bits of acrylic paint. Now these will obviously be a contrasting feature colour on the top. And I may also use bits of black and white. And maybe even a touch of gold, metallic gold. And I've also got bits of junk ready for some junk stamping. My well-used bits of these children's building blocks. I think this is the mesh that you're supposed to sew through. And lids for stamping some circles. So I'll probably use those. And again, these Delusions background stamps. I might build in some bits with those. So I'm coming to this with sort of fresh eyes. I don't know quite what I'm going to do yet. I'm just going to let it grow. I might start with a border. And like we did previously, I might double stamp this to get a bit of depth. So I'm going to bring this along the lower edge. When I eventually add my figure, just grounds the figure a bit, gives it something to stand on. And I shall repeat that in black, but as I did before, I'm just going to slightly offset that. It doesn't matter if it's a bit untidy here, because I might add a strip of vintage text or something along there just to cover that border, that lower border up there. So now I've got that border already, you can see that that gives her something to stand on there. Now I'm going to go in now with some of these Delusions background stamps. I'll go in, I might try actually going in with the orange, Monarch Orange, this colour is called. And the same sort of rolling technique. A little bit across here. And maybe a slightly lighter orange, this is Venetian orange. So this is the lighter orange, so I'll go in this lighter area here. And this time I think I'll switch to the letters. And again with the lighter orange. I think now I might introduce my warning stamp along the top here. And I think we'll do that in red. Red for danger. And at some point I'm going to bring some paint and some extra little bits, kind of blend it in a little bit. Now the handle with care. So I know that my image is going to go here. I might just bring this one along this edge here. In other words, handle her with care. So I'm going to bring this Handle with Care stamp along this edge here, again in red, kind of the warning colour. There we are. If I just put her back on there, we can see how that's starting to come together. So I've got some paint now. I've got some teal and some yellow. The yellow is part of this colour family anyway, and the teal is kind of opposite, so it's going to, you know, add a little pop of colour. And I'm going in with a credit card. I'm just going to add some extra little bits of colour. And I'm looking for, like, this is a fairly blank area, so that just needs something on it there. And here. Can also try and do with a little scrape as well, like that. It's just a nice way to introduce some extra colour. And I'll add a little bit of white. Now, just to go back to this here, I said I would stamp over this a little bit, just blend it in a little bit. Just doesn't look too stark on the page then. Okay, so I'm looking for darker areas that can do with a little bit of lightening up a bit. Now I could add some with the building block here. You need to get enough paint on there so it actually makes clear circles on the page, and painting randomly, not covering every one. I don't want a rectangle of circles like that. I just want random bits like that. A bit more. So I'm going to bring this now over some of this lettering here. And see how that warning is now starting to blend into the background a little bit. And now I'll bring it over this darker area there. So back to the credit card again. I'm going to just go in with a touch of blue. Now this really is just a touch of blue. Just adding a little pop of the opposite colour. And we can always go back and add more, just let the page grow. Sometimes you look at it later on or the next day and you see it with different eyes, you see what needs doing. Now the bottle lid. Could bring some of these in. This gives it a nice grungy look. I usually test my bottle lid just to make sure I haven't got too much paint on. I think I'll bring one in here. I like to add these because it gives me something to play with in that circle. I could add a little bit of pastel, oil pastel, bit of extra colour in there later on. And perhaps down here as well. I'll leave that there for now. I may come back and add more, but I'll leave it there for now. Now this is a pen lid. You'll notice this one, I can use that there because this metal piece doesn't come down too far. It will give me a nice small circle and I can make a bit of a feature of that. Just got to think where I'm going with this. Maybe this corner here. There's a little feature of blue there, and sometimes white circles can be useful. This is a smaller bottle lid because if there's darker areas that you want to lighten a little bit, you can bring them in like that. Perhaps down here, it's a little bit dark down here. Now this piece of mesh is really useful. I'm going to paint some gold on this. I'll just add a little bit of metallic shimmer, not too much. So I'm going to bring that over this bit here. And perhaps just over here, and bring it over that word. And it just helps to embed that word into the background a little bit. And maybe just a couple of gold circles. Again, it doesn't matter if the circle doesn't print in full, I don't think. And I'll bring this one in so it's within that bigger circle and just overlapping those letters a little bit there. I'm just going to introduce another sort of random number stamp along here. Sometimes it's really useful if you don't know which way. It's quite hard to read back to front, so just stamp it on a scrap of paper first to make sure you've got it the right way. And I'm just going to bring that one in along there. Now at this point I'm going to leave that page where it is. I'll come back and finish this off in the second DVD. I may want to add a little bit more detail to the background, but I'll let the page grow a little bit more. I'll add a piece of text here. I'm going to add the figure. Got a nice quote to go with it, and then I'll see how it looks then. It may need a little bit more, but for now I'm going to leave it just there. These small journals make great travel journals. This one's been all over the place. What we're going to look at is how to create a frame in the middle of a page. This is another great way of using a small image on a larger page. I've pre-gessoed this page already, so it's got a nice base on. This, I find it really helps me to blend the paints because it's sitting nicely on top of that gesso. I'm going to use golden fluid acrylic. I've chosen this really dark turquoise. Because of that, I'm going to need quite a bit of white, as I want to be able to get different tones, different shades of the turquoise. Might bring in a little bit of this yellow, and I might just add a couple of touches of pink. This will be really toned down with quite a lot of white. Now I've just penciled roughly an outline in the middle, so I know what I'm working to. I'm going to start with the middle square. And you'll notice that I'm going on first with white. I always do it this way so that I can build in little touches of colour. Now when I'm painting, I usually keep a baby wipe or a piece of kitchen towel and avoid using too much water on the brush. It waters the paint down. Makes it much harder to manage. I'm just building in perhaps some darker corners. It doesn't matter if it looks a bit rough and ready at this point. This is only the starting point. So we're going to build in a little bit darker in this corner as well. Eventually I'm going to add charcoal around this edge here, and this will help to separate the frame from the outside bit. Now while the paint is wet, the more you go in with the darker colour, the more you're blending it in. If you want really darker colour, wait till it's dried and then go on again. That way you can build it much darker if you wanted to. Just aiming here for darker opposite corners there. And that will do for now. It looks really messy at this stage. I'm not worried about that. Now I'm going to go around the outside here. But just to get that contrast, I'm going to build in a little bit of yellow. Again, so plenty of white. But then along this top edge, I'm going to go back to the blue again. To be careful here not to make green. I'm trying not to overlap those colours too much. going to stencil on this and add a little bit more detail as I go along. I'm going to carry on bringing the blue, it's a nice turquoise colour, along the edge. At this point I don't worry if the background looks really messy, as I know it's only the starting point. There's lots more to add yet. Bring a bit of yellow in along this edge here. I'm going to leave this light here because I might just go in there with a touch of pink. And I do mean just a tiny touch of colour. Now this you'll see is a really strong colour. So I'm just adding a little bit of white to it there. Just bring a bit in there. Most of this I'm going to write over, so it will just become very much part of the background. Now that's pretty much the base layer done, but what I can now do is go back in with a card and just add a little bit more detail. Just really gentle touches of white in there. I'm going to avoid that central square though, because that's going to be mainly taken up with an image. Going with some of this stronger turquoise. Or I could add some circles. This is back to the Delusions stencil. Might just give that a little blast with a heat then, just so that I don't start lifting paint off, because that's what can happen. Take a sponge for this, and it's a good idea just to work the sponge on your craft mat a little bit so you don't go on with too much paint and splodge through it. I may add more, I'll just leave it at that for now. And maybe a couple of bottle rings. And I think I'll just introduce some of the gold again. Just put a bit of that on my craft mat there. Now remember, this is all going to be covered by my journaling, because I intend to write a lot on this page. I like to write round in a square and keep turning the journal. Maybe just another circle there. Now I'm going to use a charcoal pencil. I'm going to draw around that frame and then blend it with a paper blending stump, and it just helps to separate the frame from the rest of the page. So I'm going to go in with this charcoal pencil now. And the thing about charcoal is it's much easier to add a bit more than to try and take it away if you add too much to start with. So just go in gently, bring it around the edge. If you want to darken it later on, you can go in with a bit more. Now this is just a paper blending stub here. And that just helps to blend that a little bit there, create the frame. I can always add a little bit more, and I might just leave it, do a bit more there, but then leave it for now. I can add more when I add my image to it later on. Now something else I might just go in with now is this Sharpie poster paint pen. As I might just add some detail here on this darker corner here, and I might add a little bit more when I put my image on in the next DVD. But for now, I think I'll leave it just like that. So that's the page with the frame ready for an image and the journaling. I'm going to create a painted background now in my large Moleskine journal. I have just put some paper in here to protect previous pages. I'm going to be using the golden fluid acrylics again. So I'm working with turquoise. You can probably tell this is my favourite colour. Quite a lot of white again to blend it. I may build in some other colours as I'm going along. I might add a little bit of this green gold. And I'm going to dry brush on some of this butterscotch colour at the end. That's a Ranger Dabber. And I might have some touches of the Ranger Dabber in gold and some black. I'm going to use a really broad brush for this. Other things that I'm going to use, I might go back to this background stamp again just to add a little bit more detail. And a couple of Crafters Workshop stencils. So the circles one, circles are my favourite really, and they appear in everything. But also this one, you can see this is very well used. Might use a bit of that as well. Now this is already gessoed, this page, so it's already got that nice base coat on. And same as before, I'm going to start with the white, and that way I can build up areas of light and dark. I tend to do brush strokes horizontal and vertical, but not usually diagonal. It can get a little bit untidy and a little bit confusing to the eye, I find. And some of these lighter areas, I'm going to leave these lighter. This is where I'm going to go in with some of the other colours, maybe the green gold. So I'm deliberately leaving some of those areas a little bit lighter. Now this is just a base layer. I'm going to be adding lots more, so it doesn't matter if it's looking a little bit untidy. I'm using the baby wipe in between just to stop me getting too much paint on the brush. Don't want to be moving too much paint around. Now there's lots more going on this page. I think there is always a point on every page where it looks a bit messy. A point where you'd like to actually rip it out and start again. But actually I think you just have to keep working. It gets better as you work on it. So now this is dried up here, I can go in and just make it a little bit darker. I don't want to blend it in too much. Remember, you can always go in with your fingers as well. Make great blending tools. Now the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to bring in this stencil. Again, just work your sponge a little bit on the craft mat so you don't go in too heavy-handed with that. I'm going to move this around into different areas. This is quite subtle doing it this way. You have quite good control of where you want the paint to go doing it this way. Unlike the credit card scraping where you can't really control that so well. You'll probably notice it's the darker areas that I'm going for with this. It won't show up on the lighter areas, so I'm going in, just bringing a bit in on those darker areas. Now, I'm going to just swap this stencil for the circles one. I'm just going to do something slightly different here. I've got some waxed palette paper here, and I'm going to put the paint onto here. And quite a good layer on there. And then I'm going to put the stencil on to pick up the paint. This way I can get the reverse, the negative of the stencil on the page. And you might find you just need something to apply a little bit of pressure, maybe a brayer like this, just to wheel over just to make sure that that pressure's applied. You could even just try a kitchen roll. And you just get a subtle little technique there. It's quite nice effect. And I'll just do that again in one more area. So picking up the paint on the reverse. So I'm just going to apply that there on that darker area. A bit of pressure. Now we have another little bit of the reverse stencil. When you're using stencils like this at home, it's always important to wipe acrylic paint off straight away, because once it dries, it's on there forever. Now I think now I'm going to go in with my card, and I can add some extra touches of colour. This green gold is very translucent colour. You can tell actually by looking at the bottle. They paint a bit on here, and if you can see those black stripes through there, then it's really translucent. Some are more translucent than others. But this means you can go in and take a bit over. It starts to build in. Little bits of extra colour. I'll just give that a wipe, and I'm going to go in with some of the white. Now again, I tend to do these kind of marks horizontal on vertical, it's already quite a busy background. If I start to go in with diagonals, it's introducing a lot of different patterns all at the same time. It's a bit cluttered. I'm going to do a little bit of dry brushing with this colour. This is quite a grungy colour, but I like it. It takes away the kind of pastel edge of other paints. This is a completely dry brush, so it's just taking it over in areas, and you'll see I'm going for the lighter areas. It gives it quite a grungy look, this. A lot of raw brush strokes going on here. I'll leave it there for now. I may add a bit more of that later on. I'll see how it looks as we go along. Now I'm going to go in with some black now. I'm going to use my bottle lid, but I'm going to use this lower end of the bottle lid. I'm going to create a border. I like the contrast of the black against a bright background. You have to be feeling quite bold to go on with this stage. Now once you've dipped this in the paint, you might just want to work it on your craft mat a little bit, make sure it's not too laden with paint. And I'm just going to bring it along this whole edge here to create a border along the bottom. Now you'll never get a perfect circle because there's no flexibility in this bottle lid, but that's part of the charm. I'm going to add to this because I'm going to doodle round it, I'm going to stamp circles around it, so it doesn't matter that it's not perfect. I like it when you get gaps like that. Now while I've got the black paint out here, I'm just going to add a little bit of water and I'm going to create some splats. Now once I've mixed my paint, what I usually like to do, just on a scrap of paper, I've just taken mine out from underneath, just try the consistency of it. That's looking good. Now if you tap here, you'll get a fine spray, but if you flick, you get that nice line of dots. That's what I'm after. Again, you've got to be quite brave to go on with this step, but here goes. And I might just do one more. And I think just as a final step for now, I'm going to add some bottle lids again. Can't seem to complete a page without these. What I'm going to do is just paint it on like this. I'm just going to finish these circles off along the bottom here, and this time I've got white, but I'm using the other end of the bottle lid, so it should fit exactly over. Which just helps to define these a little bit. I'm going to leave that page there for now. I may well add a few more touches of paint, but I'll see how it moves along. We've done some stenciling and reverse stenciling. We've got our splats in there, we've got a bit of dry brushing, and we've created a bottle top border. And I shall come back and finish that in the next DVD. I'm going to create another painted page now in my large A4 Moleskine journal. Quite like the look of two different pages side by side. I'll show you an example, like here. I like the look of two pages, two different pages. So I'm going to work here next to the one that I've just done. I'm going to use Claudine Helmuth Studio Line paints, and I've chosen the teal, the red and the yellow. Now that red actually turns into a really nice pink when I add the white to it. What that's going to give us, if I just look back at the colour wheel here, by using that pink, the teal and the yellow, means that we're going to be working in a triangle of colours. Those colours really pop together. They're a little bit more difficult to blend because you can create mud on the page if you're not careful. So we're going to have a go at blending three colours, really bright background. So other things that I might be using on this page, again I've got my favourite circle stencil. This is the larger Delusions stencil with the different size circles on. And I'm going to be using this foam stamp. This is the letter or a number stamp, and I'm going to be using that with some archival ink, which I'll then be sponging over the top. I may also on this page use some rub-ons. You can see I've cut a couple out ready to use. Now these are a great alternative to stamping, especially if you're travelling and you don't want to carry loads of ink pads and things, and these are fantastic for your backgrounds. These you can see are 7 Gypsies rub-ons, and I may use those as I'm going along. Now as usual I'm going to start with a white. These studio paints are so brightly coloured. You'll see how this red turns into a really bright pink. Now I do want that a bit darker in that corner, but I'm going to let that dry a little bit and then come back to it, because if I keep working on it now I'm just blending it in all the time. So I shall come back to that so I can make it a little bit darker. And here I'm just going to bring in some yellow. So again, going on first with the white. Now I don't want to blend those in too much, I just want to slightly overlap them there, but not too much. I don't want to create orange in the middle. I want a definite yellow and a definite pink. And this is one of the problems of trying to work in 3 colours. You can blend them and get the colours in between, and that's not what I want particularly on this page. Now that's a bit drier, I can go over and get that a little bit darker in that corner. Great thing about acrylics is if it all goes horribly wrong, you can just paint over it again. Very forgiving to work with in that way. To bring the pink all the way down this edge. I am going to build in some teal, but just not yet. So I'm just going into this corner with a bit of darker pink again. I'm going to stencil and stamp and sponge a lot over in these corners so I can have a nice strong pink to start with there. Clean that brush off in between. If you use your baby wipe, then your brush doesn't get too wet. Now where I'm building in these lighter areas, this is where I will be able to go in with the teal. to be really careful that I don't mix a nice mud colour on the page. So if I go in and make some lighter areas, I can go in and add the teal later on when it's dried. This corner's a little bit patchy here, so I'm just going to go back in, try and blend that in a little bit better. This is the point now where I can go in and add a little bit of teal. I've got some nice lighter areas that I can bring that colour in. Now we're talking tiny amount of paint here. Just want to add some little flashes of the colour, not too much. I'm going to introduce this stamp now. These foam stamps do need quite a bit of inking up, as they're quite absorbent. And I'm really just introducing this as a random feature. I'm going to sponge and stencil over the top of this, so if it's not a perfect stamp, it doesn't really matter. It's just quite a nice bold feature. Again, it's the black against the coloured background. Now I'm going to bring this into this corner. I'll put it the other way on. Okay, I've finished with that stamp for now. What I am going to do is bring in this large circle stencil. Now this is where the fun really begins, because I can create a really nice contrast now. In this light yellow corner here, I'm now going to be brave and stencil through that with a pink, and that's going to give me some really, really bright circles in that corner, which I'm then going to work on a little bit more. I might doodle around them. I'm just working the paint into my sponge. And this is going to create a really lovely contrast with the yellow in the background. I think I'll just go down as far as that one. See what a nice contrast that is. I'll work on that a little bit later on as well. Now I'm going to build in a little bit more now with this circle stencil. I'm going to bring it right into the corner. I'm going over the stamp that I've just done. I'm going to keep doing this, and then I'm going to move it slightly and do it with some more colour. I'm going to keep going right up to here. I'm going to use these white circles later on, because I can, once these have dried, I can go in with some pastel or some pan pastel and add some colour to those circles. So that's like just a base layer really, the white there. You see these white circles here, I'm going to use those to colour a little bit later on. So while I've got this stencil here, I'm just going to slightly offset that, and I'm going to go in with some of the stronger pink in this corner, so it's overlapping some of those white circles, definitely overlapping some of the black that I stamped. You can see that this zero here is just starting to fade more into the background. I'm going to repeat those steps but up in the top corner. What's useful about this as well, I just caught the edge of the stamp there earlier, which as you probably know that happens quite often, and I can attempt to cover that up a little bit. Not that it really matters. So again, I'm going right over that stamp from earlier. And then I shall just move that slightly and bring some of the darker pink into this corner as well. There's quite a bit of detail now in those corners. So I've got my rub-on now that I cut out earlier. One of the advantages of rub-ons, of course, is you can put it down, you can see how it's going to look. That gives you the freedom to move it around. And I think I'll put that one there, and I'm just going to go over it with a bone folder. Now you can see when these start to work, they go a slightly lighter colour on the top. You do have to work quite hard, push that right down. And if it doesn't work perfectly, it doesn't matter, because I'll just stamp some paint over it. And usually you can just peel it up and have a little look, see how it's doing. And we have that one, and I think I'll add another one around about there. And as I say, these are great if you're travelling, because you can build up some really lovely journal backgrounds. You don't have to carry all your ink pads and things around. See if that one's working okay. So yeah, that's added a little bit more detail in that corner. But we haven't finished yet. I'm still going to add lots more to this page. I'm going to go in now with the credit card. You see, I'm going over that area where I've just been. Again, it helps just even over those rub-ons a little bit. Go all over the page with these. And you can really just go to town on this, add as much detail as you want to. Sometimes you could add a little scrape as well. It's the sort of thing you don't really notice when you look at the page, but it's all there. It's all part of the depth in your backgrounds. And here's another bit here where I caught the edge of the stamp, so I'll just disguise it a bit. I'm going to add a little bit of black as well, same thing. I can always add more of this as I come to finish the page off. When I'm working normally at home, at this point I wouldn't really know what I was going to add to the page or where I was going with it, so I might need to leave it and come back and add a bit more as I go along. Now a couple of bottle lids as well. Again, this will give me something to play with, add a little bit of colour to. It's quite nice once these have dried and I'm working on it, perhaps on the second DVD, is to bring colour inside there with a pan pastel or an oil pastel, just to give it a little bit more definition. Okay, a little bit of gold again, and on here. And I'm still mainly focusing in those corners. I'm going to add an image in this area here, so I'm kind of leaving space for that. But over here in these corners I can keep going. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you might get 2 stamps out of that. Now again, I think this centre bit here might just need a little splat with the paintbrush, so I'm just going to mix some of my black with just a little bit of water to get it to the right consistency. And I'm just going to check it first. And what this is, it's a last minute flick, low down. Otherwise you're going to send the paint halfway across the room. It's a low down last minute flick. Now I'm just going to add a little bit more detail in this corner. This is with my Faber-Castell Pitt pen. And this is a really loose scribbling action. I'm going to go around these circles, and it absolutely is a scribble. This kind of goes against the grain for some of us who want to be a bit neat, but I'm okay with this now. That's just to define those circles a little bit there. Now, just as a finishing step for this background, I'm going to add some of my mica ink spray. This is one that I've made up previously with some of the Delusions inks, and I've added a bit of mica powder. Now, just as a precaution, I'm going to put a sheet there And I've got one here as well, because I'm going to spray the ink here and I'm going to just tip that page and let it dribble across. That's going to give me some horizontal lines, hopefully. And I'm just going to let that sit for a while. I don't want to block that straight away, because all I will do is take the colour straight back off. So I'm going to leave that, let it dry a little while, then I'll blot it, and that will still leave me with those nice contrasting stripes across the page. And that's now ready for DVD 2, where we'll finish that page off with some images and some journaling. Now, I just wanted to show you, this is a double page spread in my large A4 Moleskine journal. This is the double page that I use to create my calendar pages. One of the really nice things about doing these calendar pages is it's really freeing to do this background, because most of it gets covered up with the little daily squares. There's so many different ways of laying it out and so on. People do things very differently. It's still a really popular challenge on my blog. Lots of people are wanting to do this, and one of the nice things is that you get to journal every day. Even if it's just one tiny little square, you are doing something every day. Now, I've pre-painted my background here. As you can see, there's still a bit more I can add to this. I'm going to use this Grasses stamp by Tim Holtz. This is from the Spring Sprung set. And I'm going to do, as we did before, I'm going to double stamp this along the bottom, just to create a little border here. So first of all, I'm going to do it in a similar blue colour to the background that I've already done. In fact, I'll tell you that this is aquamarine. And a lot of this border will get covered up by other elements that I'm going to add. And it's just a nice way of adding a bit of depth. So now I'm going to do similar to what we did before, and I'm going to introduce some black and slightly offset it. And same again on the other side. It doesn't matter where these little gaps are, it doesn't really show when you get everything else on the page. Now, most of this area here is going to be filled with the daily journaling squares, but it just helps to balance things if there's a little bit of detail at the top as well. So I'm just going to bring that down a little bit at the top. Not quite as much as along the bottom. And perhaps a bit on the other side as well. And then again, just with a little bit of black. This is just kind of framing it ready for all the other elements that I'm going to add. Now, as for this big space here, you can really go to town with this. You can add as much detail as you want to. Again, most of it gets covered up, but there's little glimpses in between each square, which makes it really nice when you get some detail peeping through. So you can go in with anything at all. This is what I mean, it's really freeing. You can bring it down over the detail that you've just stamped in. And you can add as much detail as you want to. You can just keep going, keep going. Now I'm going to leave that there for now, as it's all similar techniques to what we've already covered. And I'm just going to finish with a little bit of, this is Delusions ink, but with added mica that I've mixed up in a bottle. And I'm just going to add a few little sprays, let it dribble down a bit. And then I'm going to leave that page there because most of the detail I'm going to add in the next DVD. And that's it for bold backgrounds. Hopefully you'll have had a chance to play along and create some bold backgrounds in your own art journals. Join me in DVD 4, Personalised Pages, to add some more layers, more colour, more embellishment, and even add some journaling to those finished pages.